Hello everyone, I am the Commander Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Modern Horizons 2, Asmoranomardicadaistinaculdacar. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to certain videos on YouTube. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Asmoranomardicadaistinaculdacar is a 3/3 human wizard with no casting cost. However, whenever you discard a card, you can pay 1 black-red hybrid mana to cast her. 0 is still taxable though, so if you have to recast her from the command zone, she'll cost 2 generic more on top of that for each time she's cast from the command zone. She has an enter the battlefield trigger that has you tutor for the Underworld Cookbook, which is one of the biggest flavor wins WotC has done in quite some time. She also has an activated ability wherein you sacrifice 2 food tokens in order for a creature to deal 6 damage to itself. I'm guessing that's some major food poisoning from Chef Asmorano's cooking. This combo is great with her cookbook since you can tap it and discard a card to create a food token. However, you can also pay 4, tap it, and sacrifice it to return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. However, I hardly use that ability with this deck. What we will be doing with this deck is using our discard outlets to get our bombs both in artifact creature and artifact creature form into the graveyard for value, which we will then return to the battlefield later on. Since we need to discard a card to be able to even cast Asmoranomardicadaistinaculdacar, let's first see how we'll achieve that and then we'll see how to make the most of it. The way the deck's doing multiple things at once from its engines and synergy. Jalum Tome and Key to the City immediately come to mind. The Tome is pretty straightforward since we draw and then discard a card. The Key is a bit more than just a discard outlet though. It also serves to make a creature indestructible, which is pretty key, pun intended, to what the deck wants to achieve. If we reanimate a fatty we discarded a while ago, then once we reanimate it, we can make it unblockable to really get the most out of it. Similarly to the Tome, it costs 2 mana to draw a card from when it untaps. Anti-Falconwrath, Deal Broker, Mad Prophet, and Rummaging Goblin are the creatures with loot effects. While there's no cards with madness in the deck, Angie's still useful as a hasty loot effect. Deal Broker is the only one that has us draw first and then discard, unlike the other 3 that has us discard first and then draw. Since this is a constructed deck, you can simply ignore his Draft Matters abilities. He is amazing in Commander Cubes though. Dragon Mage, Magus of the Wheel, and Ruin Grinder are even better than these since they are wheel effects on a body. The Dragon needs to connect with combat damage to trigger the wheel effect, while the Magus needs to be sacrificed to its own ability and Ruin Grinder needs to die. The Dragon's a bit hefty at 7 mana, but that's why we'd rather reanimate it than hardcast it. Then we get a 5/5 flyer that wheels the table. Since we're able to reanimate creatures from the graveyard, the Magus is even better since we can potentially use it whenever we need to refuel our hand while also disrupting opponents' hands. We can do the same with Ruin Grinder, another decent beater since it's a 7/4 with Menace, but we need a sacrifice outlet to do so, but we'll see those in a bit. It's still amazing in the deck because it has Mountain Cycling, allowing us to discard it to get a mountain into our hand, and potentially allowing us to cast Asmoranomardicadaistinaculdacar as well. Being an artifact creature is incredibly relevant as well, which will soon see why. The Ready Scrap Savant is another loot effect on a permanent but in Planeswalker form. He's perhaps the best one because not only is he a consistent looting effect but a consistent artifact reanimation effect as well. We do have to sacrifice an artifact to do so, but that's what food tokens are for, and for other artifacts like Ruin Grinder, which we just saw. His emblem is pretty busted. While it's not the whole point of running him, try and get him the moment you're able to. Thrill of Possibility, Faithless Looting, Tormenting Voice, Wild Guess, and Cathartic Reunion are some more loot effects. These are cheap to cast and can help us cast Asmoranomardicadaistinaculdacar early on to get that cookbook into our hands too. While she doesn't have a discard outlet on her card, she does tutor for the cookbook which is great for what the deck wants to achieve. Dark Deal is included in lieu of Wheel of Fortune since I had mentioned in a video some time ago that I would no longer be recommending Wheel of Fortune in my deck text. There is no reason for that card to be so expensive. If you want to proxy it, go for it, but Dark Deal is almost as good a replacement, in this deck at least. It can still draw you cards while emptying your hand of things you'd rather have in the graveyard while also disrupting opponents. The final discard outlets in the deck are Ash Barrens, Blasted Landscape, Barren Moor, Polluted Mire, Desert of the Fervent, Desert of the Glorified, Forgotten Cave, Smoldering Crater, and Kanyaslav. The best ones are Ash Barrens, Barren Moor, and Forgotten Cave since they only cost 1 mana to cycle. That being said, the others aren't so bad for costing 2 mana to cycle. We are trading away a land to be able to cast Asmoranomardicadaistinaculdacar, but at least we can draw a card for it. But they don't take up slots in the deck and they later on help us draw into our deck if we're running out of steam. Since the deck's also running all 8 fetch lands, Crucible of Worlds is also in it. With the 8 fetches and 9 cycling lands, those are 17 lands we can reuse from the graveyard. It also lets us discard lands from our hand to our looting effects and then replay them afterwards from the graveyard. So it doesn't just synergize with half the lands in the deck, but with the wheel and looting effects as well. Alright, now that we saw the better effects for getting things into our graveyard while also getting value from doing so, let's see how we can get even further value from it. The previously mentioned Crucible of Worlds and the ready Scrap Savant should have previewed how we're going to be reanimating most of the cards that we're discarding away, like I also mentioned in the beginning of the video. Goblin Welder, Hell's Caretaker, and Feldon of the Third Path do just that. The first two are essentially trading one in play for one in the graveyard, but it's worth it if we're getting something much better, especially the Welder. Combined with the Underworld Cookbook, we can discard a huge bomb of an artifact to the graveyard, creating a food token. We can then use that food token with the Welder to get the discarded artifact onto the battlefield at instant speed, no less. Hell's Caretaker can only be used during our upkeep, but that's not such a huge drawback. Feldon is amazing here since he doesn't really reanimate the creature. He creates a hasty artifact creature token copy of it. This is busted with cards like Mages of the Wheel to potentially wheel every turn for just 5 mana. Oh, and at instant speed. Since the token is also an artifact, we can even use it with Goblin Welder. Since it's a creature, we can also use it for Hell's Caretaker if we don't have any creatures for it. Just amazing synergy between these three. These 3 creatures, the Welder in particular, are so amazing in the deck that Vampiric Tutor, Demonic Tutor, Cruel Tutor, Grim Tutor, and Profane Tutor are included just to have ample opportunities to get them into our hand. With all the cycling and looting, we can eventually draw into them, so if you don't like running tutors, you don't have to. You can just swap in more card draw effects if you wanted to. But they do make the deck much more consistent since we want to be reanimating the things we're discarding to said discarded effects. Battle Mage's Bracers and Illusionist Bracers help us get even further mileage from these creatures' activated abilities. And not just those either. We can also equip these to the creatures that tap to loot or onto Asmoranomardicadaistinaculdacar in order to hit 2 different creatures for 6 damage or 1 for 12 damage with just 2 food tokens. As for really duplicating these creatures' effects, Scrap Mastery and Living Death do so in spades. Since the deck is built for filling our graveyard, these will always benefit us more and can even function as a simultaneous board wipe. Just be careful not to use them against another deck that uses their graveyard for value. As to what we prefer discarding away, let's look at the beaters first. Elbrus the Binding Blade, Cauldron Complete, and Ancient Stone Idol. Yes, I'm aware that the first 2 are artifacts and not creatures, but when Cauldron Complete enters the battlefield, it creates a 0/0 Phyrexian Germ that it will automatically attach to. It is pretty expensive to equip to another creature afterwards, but it is indestructible and gives indestructible as well. So if we have the mana for it, it's a great way to protect Goblin Welder, Feldon, etc. As for equipping Elbrus, it only costs 1 to do so. Then when that creature connects, it transforms into Withengar Unbound, which more often than not will get through since it has Intimidate. If not, it also has Flying and Trample for good measure. Oh, and it's also a 13/13 to boot. If that weren't enough, whenever a player loses, it gets even bigger. So I would say he's quite the beater. Ancient Stone Idol isn't that difficult to hardcast if it came to it, since it has Flash and has a built-in cost reduction ability. That being said, it's a 12/12 with Trample for just 10 mana anyways. Then if it dies, we create a 6/12 artifact creature token with Trample. This isn't the only beater in the deck like that either. Phyrexian Triniform, Triplicate Titan, and Wormcorn Engine do something similar. Although they're smaller than the Idol, they create multiple tokens when they die. But while they're still alive and kicking, they can do quite a lot of damage. The Titan in particular, since it's a 9/9 with Flying, Vigilance, and Trample. However, as I've mentioned multiple times, the deck aims to do as much as it can with all the cards in it for its engines and strategies. So let's quickly see how amazing these creatures are for value, as well as smashing face. It's all thanks to Goblin Welder. Let's say we activated the Cookbook to discard Triplicate Titan to the graveyard, thus creating a food token. The Welder then sacrifices that food to reanimate the Titan. We can now use the Titan to attack, sure, but let's say we have more artifacts in the graveyard or artifacts to reanimate but nothing else in our hand to discard to the Cookbook. No worries, we can sacrifice the Titan to the Welder. This creates one of each type of golem it creates while also reanimating the other artifact in the graveyard. We now have 3 more artifacts for the Welder to sacrifice. Just use whichever in order to reanimate the Titan itself. With this engine, we're getting tons of tokens each time while also getting our original beater back. This also works with Ancient Stone Idol, Phyrexian Triniform, and Wormcoil Engine. So we can use it to get tons of tokens, get our beaters back, or to get back our other bombs in artifact form. We can also do this with Ruin Grinder if we want to spam wheels after having accumulated a lot of artifact creature tokens. Another amazing combo you can use is thanks to Draw Scorpion with Liquid Metal Coating and or Liquid Metal Torque. In my deck, I went with just the Torque, since we can also use it as a cheap mana rock, something black-red needs to accelerate their mana anyways. Which again, I want the cards in the deck to be able to do multiple things. So let's see how it interacts with the previously shown combo. With Liquid Metal Torque, we can turn the Goblin Welder into an artifact. Then each time it sacrifices an artifact creature token to reanimate the original creature that created them, the Scorpion untaps the Welder and we can do it all over again. If not interrupted, we can do this indefinitely, creating infinitely many artifact creature tokens, infinite sacrifice triggers, infinite enters the battlefield triggers, etc. The most important thing is that we can do this at instant speed. So if we do it at the beginning of the end step before ours, we have an infinitely large army to clear off the table. Or we can use it to reanimate all of the bombs in our graveyard. As for those artifact bombs that we'd rather cheat in from the graveyard than hardcast, Chromatic Orrery and Coveted Jewel are two of them. Being black-red means the deck doesn't have the same advantages of mana acceleration like green does, but we can make do with the mana rocks like these, especially when they're practically free. As a bonus, Coveted Jewel draws us 3 cards when it enters the battlefield, so if we're able to consistently sacrifice it, then reanimate it, we can draw into a ton of cards. Burnished Heart, while not a bomb, can also be recurred multiple times for value for land-based mana acceleration, which is hard to come by in black-red anyways. The deck is running 10 basic lands because of all the land-based mana acceleration effects in the deck. So far we've seen the 8 fetch lands and Crucible of Worlds, which can help us never miss a land drop, while the Crucible can also help us play discarded lands. But consistently reanimating the Heart can also get even more lands into play, while also thinning the deck of those lands. It isn't the only artifact that provided land-based ramp. The deck is also running Sword of the Animist and Sword of Hearth and Home. Since attacking with huge beaters is one way the deck aims to win, equipping any of them with either of these swords and we're able to really ramp with the deck. Testing it had me ramp harder than even the green decks I faced off against. These aren't even that expensive to cast anyway, so you might not even have to cheat them in. However, if they're destroyed, we can very easily recover them anyways. Going back to the bombs, you can't go wrong with Darksteel Forge and Mycosith Lattice. The Forge is pretty self-explanatory since it protects all of our artifacts from being destroyed. Combined with the Lattice, then all of our permanents are indestructible. However, the Lattice also makes our opponent's permanents into artifacts, so we can actually use Goblin Welder offensively by forcing them to sacrifice any good card for a lesser artifact in their graveyard. They do have to have an artifact in their graveyard for us to do this though, but once they do, Goblin Welder becomes an even better card in here. That being said, Karn the Great Creator is the best way to bring the pain to opponents when Mycosith Lattice is out. And even without the Lattice, his static ability is still an amazing stacks effect since it shuts down any artifacts opponents have anyways like mana rocks, equipment, treasures, etc. While Karn isn't included slowly for locking everyone out of the game when combined with the Lattice, he does allow us to recover any artifact that gets exiled by an opponent. Artifact exile effects are few and far between, but are still common and fair in commander decks, so getting back our Underworld Cookbook or any other key artifact is very useful. His +1 ability is also epic in the deck since we can turn those high-costed non-creature artifacts into huge beaters, which is the main way we want to win. So Karn is not only a win con when Mycosith Lattice is out, but he also supports the main beatdown win con as well. The Immortal Sun, God's Pharaoh Statue, and Platinum Angel are some more stacksy effects in the deck. Keep in mind that the Sun's Planeswalker hosing ability is symmetric, so it shuts down Karn's activated abilities, as well as the readies. But they're the only 2 Planeswalkers in the deck, so it might do more against opponents anyways. Besides, Karn's static ability will still affect opponents. That being said, we draw an extra card, our spells are cheaper, and our creatures get bigger. The statue does the opposite for opponents, making all of their spells cost 2 more. On top of that, they all lose 1 life at the end of our turn. That might not be so impacting, but the extra tax definitely is. The Angel is not only reanimated by Goblin Welder, but by Hell's Caretaker as well. Once in play, we can't lose the game. It's also a 4/4 flyer when it matters. Mindslaver is another oppressive artifact, even more so if we can continuously reanimate it from the graveyard. If we're able to use it thrice per turn, we've essentially made yet another lock for our opponents, thus providing yet another potential win con. Even if we're not locking out the rest of the table, we can control the biggest or second biggest threat at the table and do so each turn until they're no longer a threat. Keep in mind that this is a very mean card and not for every pot. Duplicate is one final destruction piece we can consistently get back and forth from the graveyard in an even easier fashion since it's both an artifact and a creature. So we can potentially exile a creature each turn, or possibly more than one if we're recurring it multiple times in a turn. On top of that, if we imprint a fatty, we get another beater. The following cards in the deck are the essential card advantage, responses, and mana acceleration of any deck. The rest of the deck's disruption is in counterspell form: Withering Boon, Tibalt's Trickery, Red Elemental Blast, and Pyroblast. No one really expects a non-blue deck to counter spells. Granted, 75% of these are situational but useful nonetheless. Withering Boon helps us counter any indestructible creatures, especially Avacyn Angel of Hope, since we already have creature removal in the command zone in the form of Asmoranomardicadaistinaculdacar's activated ability. But if the creature is indestructible, we can't do much there. The red blasts are super useful at countering blue counter spells as well as an overloaded Cyclonic Rift. Nothing would suck more than to have our board full of tokens get bounced to our hand. Worst comes to worst, we can always just discard our bombs again and then reanimate them, but it does set us back. Tibalt's Trickery is more of a Chaos Warp type effect, but it does counter any spell while also exiling some cards from the top of an opponent's library. Blasphemous Act and Damnation are used in case we're facing too many swarm decks. If we're in a situation where we're going tall while opponents are going wide, then cast these. If we're going wide because we've assembled the engines to do so, then don't use them. But it's always good to have them and not need them, than need them and not have them. Vandal Blast is not only amazing on its own, but game ending when Mycosynth Lattice is in play. That's usually game over and everyone scoops, giving you the victory that way. So it can also be used as yet another win con. Do keep in mind to not cast Scrap Mastery after overloading it. As for the rest of the deck's mana acceleration, Academy Manufactor, one of my favorite new cards in some time, is also included here. While there isn't many ways to create the appropriate tokens for the deck, the Underworld Cookbook is an artifact that is always available to us. So every time it creates a food token, we also get a clue token and a treasure token. So we're always getting fuel to draw, gain life, get mana, or even to fuel Goblin Welder. Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Arcane Signet, and Rakdos Signet are the remaining mana rocks in the deck, and their inclusion is pretty self-explanatory. These are used more for the early game though, but can then be used as sacrifice fodder in a pinch in the mid to late game. Especially since the deck does have ways of actual land ramp, so we're going to always be set in mana unless we have bafflingly bad luck. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the other lands. The deck's running Badlands, Blood Crypt, Smoldering Marsh, Sulphurous Mire, Luxury Suite, Dragonstall Summit, Graven Cairns, and Command Tower, as well as 5 of each basic land. As previously mentioned, since we can continuously ramp for basics with Burnished Heart, the 2 Swords, and we're using any of the 8 fetch lands in the deck, running 10 basics is good enough for the deck to make good use of these abilities. And we're not color screwed since most of the deck is colorless, and Asmoranomardicadaistinaculdacar can be cast with either black or red mana. As with all my deck techs, you don't need the more expensive fetch lands, Badlands, Mana Crypt, or Mana Vault if you're not playing online or proxying them. You can easily swap them out for budget substitutes and the deck will still run just fine. This brew is just an idea of how to brew around Asmoranomardicadaistinaculdacar. I've been wanting to brew around this commander since she was first spoiled, but couldn't really get a grasp of what I wanted or what I could accomplish with her, so I sort of left her on the back burner. But while I was testing my Osgir deck online before I began assembling it in paper, I got inspired to make Asmoranomardicadaistinaculdacar similar to Osgir, but with black and red instead of red and white. It's not as consistent as Osgir, but being black means able to run tutors if you really wanted that consistency. When I tried the initial shell, I was thrilled with it. This deck is super fun and opponents might not really see what you're doing at first glance until you've already assembled your engine pieces. And even then, if they throw any wrenches in them, the deck has plenty of win cons as you've seen. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I'm the Meta Kirby, and happy brewing.